There you go, it's starting. Way ahead of me. Great, okay. So just a few things I want to mention before we get going. The first is that this training was developed in collaboration with mine and Rakesh's lovely colleague Adriana, who is our organisational development leader at Tipping Point and has loads of experience in conflict mediation. She's on new child leave at the moment, but loads of the resources and the information came from her, and we kind of co-developed it before she left. So I just want to mention that. And the second thing is that the content that we're discussing tonight might be quite challenging. I'm sure all of us will have some experience with conflict, and regardless of how well it's handled, it's usually not a particularly pleasant experience. So we're going to be thinking about examples and also kind of individual responses. So there's no obligation to share anything that you don't want to, or to participate in any of the activities that you don't want to. There'll be 2 more rounds of breakouts, but if you don't want to participate in them, feel free to drop Rakesh a message and he'll just leave you in the main room. So there isn't opt-out there if you want it. And also, as I mentioned at the start, it's an especially important week to keep in mind our group agreements around boundaries and confidentiality during the breakout groups. So please just keep that in mind. And we're here if anything comes up that you want support with. You can either message Rakesh or I on a direct message. Okay, so there's lots of different ways to define conflict resilience, and I'm absolutely not saying that this is the only definition. But for the purpose of this session, when I'm saying conflict resilience, I'm referring to the culture, practices, skills, and policies that contribute towards creating a culture where the harm caused by conflict is minimised and the generative potential of conflict is magnified or maximised. And there's lots of different factors that could go into conflict resilience, including like personal, structural, cultural. We're going to focus a bit more on the personal today, and then next week is going to be more around kind of culture and structure, but obviously there's a lot of crossovers there, and they're all kind of informed by each other. Just a few more definitions before we get going. You might have also come across the term conflict transformation, which refers to the work that goes into addressing the kind of wider cultures, structures, and power dynamics which contribute to conflict. So basically, instead of just focusing solely on mediating a specific incident, looking at everything that is around it and goes into it. So really related to conflict resilience. And then lastly, conflict mediation. It's probably a term you've come across. It refers to the process of seeking to understand and resolve a conflict, which is usually happening by a third party holding facilitated conversations or a singular conversation with the people in conflict. We'll talk a little bit more about the role of conflict mediation in the session that we have in a few weeks, which is going to go kind of more into practicalities. Before I move on to the next slide, I'm just going to pause in case there was any questions. There was a lot of words there. Was that all clear? And get some thumbs up. Cool. So why is it important? So this is something that I just came across in the last few weeks in the process of developing this workshop. It came from a Climate Justice Alliance workshop. Basically the Chinese character for conflict is made up of 2 separate characters, meaning danger and opportunity, which I think kind of looking at the dangers and the opportunities associated with conflict is a really good way of highlighting the importance of conflict resilience. So I thought we could use that as a way of kind of framing it. So firstly, can't ignore the danger of conflict. For a lot of people, conflict has been or could be highly traumatic and cause a lot of harm. I mean, conflict on large scales causes harm every day. I'm sure we're all very aware of that, but conflict also on the interpersonal scale causes harm. So it only emphasises why it's important to work on conflict resilience. The more comfortable we are with conflict in our groups, and the more we develop our expertise and practices around it, the less likely it is to cause harm. And conflict resilience also includes considering everything that contributes to an individual's response to conflict. So that's what we're going to spend some time looking at today. But it is also really important to not ignore the opportunity aspect of conflict. When handled well, conflict has the potential to be generative, to be transformative, and to tell you important information about the context that you're working in. So you might be familiar with the phrase conflict is feedback. And it basically refers to the idea that conflict can tell you a lot of information and be an indicator that something needs to change, or that an important conversation is going unaddressed. So it's kind of an opportunity for feedback that, if listened to, can tell you a lot of useful information. So working on the ability to listen to what conflict is telling you about a wider context, or a relationship, or a power dynamic, or something kind of not working right, is a really important skill in conflict resilience. There's obviously a whole lot more to it in terms of why it's important, but hopefully that gives a bit of an orientation. I'm just going to pause again to see if there's any questions, or if that was all clear. Cool. So just a little bit of an introduction. So to give a bit of kind of practical grounding to it, we're going to be thinking of a situation where you were aware of a conflict and reflecting on what some of the opportunities and some of the dangers might have been in that situation. So to give an example, maybe there's a conflict in your group because person A feels like they're doing too much of the work and they're getting resentful, they're not getting valued for it. Whereas person B feels like person A has taken over and they're not sharing the decision making fairly. So a danger in this situation could be that the conflict goes unaddressed and someone ends up leaving the group, or maybe there's a big blowout at a meeting which drags more people into it, and unhelpful things are said in the kind of anger and heat of the moment that end up causing harm in the long term. But then on the flip side, some of the opportunities could be that it's telling us that there's some need that's going unaddressed in the group, or maybe that there's some missing group processes around sharing tasks and agreeing how decisions are made, or maybe there's some power imbalances there, or maybe, yeah, something that is not going right and needs to be having some attention on it. So there's the opportunity for this conflict, although it's maybe not nice in the moment, to open up important conversations and lead to changes which can help the group to function more healthily in the long term. That's just a made-up example, but potentially is one that feels a little bit similar to something you've experienced in the past, if you're anything like me. But a reminder again that there's no pressure to delve into this conversation any more than feels comfortable for you. I think it is really useful to use examples from real life because it kind of makes it real, it kind of brings it to life. But if it feels too much, you might want to think of one that doesn't feel too close to home, or one that happened far enough in the past that it's not too heavy for you to share now. Or if that feels too much again, you can always think of one from a film or a TV series or a book that you've been reading recently. I found that often in conflict workshops, they use examples from Friends because lots of people have seen it. So maybe there's one there that tells you something. We're going to be in groups of 3 or 4 for 10 minutes. So there's not loads of time, but hopefully enough that you can have a chance to reflect and share if you want to, and maybe identify some similarities. I think let's take 2 minutes now before we go into breakouts to have a bit of quiet reflection time, because it's quite a big question. And then when you go into breakout groups, you can have those 10 minutes to share with your group. Maybe you've got one jumping out at you already, but I think 2 minutes might be quite nice. So we'll take until 6:40 and then we'll head into breakout groups. And also if there's any questions that come up in those 2 minutes, then we'll have a chance to answer them before we go into the breakouts. Hopefully that sounds okay. Yeah. Thank you, Rakesh. So we're going to be taking a look at personal reactions to conflict, as I said, but I wanted to start with this trauma iceberg, which hopefully is familiar from Snook's session on de-escalation. I wanted to share it again because I think it's a really helpful way of looking at reactions to conflict as well as de-escalation and where they might come from. So essentially it's showing us how much we may not initially see when it comes to someone's behaviour or a reaction to a conflict scenario. So the tip of the iceberg is what we might initially see or what be initially apparent, but everything below the surface is just as important for kind of understanding a reaction and where it's coming from. So in addition to all of the things that go into informing all of the various traumas that go into informing behaviour, there are also lots of other things that I would add which can affect conflict styles, including positionality in various different forms, and also cultural context, as Michelle just mentioned. And an individual on a personal level could also react to conflict in different ways according to the situation or what's going on for you in other areas of your life. If you're having health issues or particularly challenging stuff going on for you, then you're going to react to conflict differently than if you're feeling like you're in a really good place. And you might react to conflict very differently in your workplace than you would with your friends or with your family. So that being said, I think there is some value in reflecting on different conflict styles, even though there's loads of nuance to it. This slide looks quite HR-y, and I don't love the way it's presented, but I think it's actually a really useful way of looking at conflict styles. I came across it initially through some slides that the Climate Justice Alliance developed, but I think the original theory is the Thomas Kilmann conflict management model, which also sounds very HR-y. So we can maybe try and look over that bit, but it's absolutely not a perfect definition. And someone could fall into one of these categories at one time and a completely different one at another time. And there's obviously loads of blurred lines between them. You might be familiar with the kind of fight, flight, freeze, fawn conflict model, which is maybe the most like culturally known conflict style model. But I find this one maybe a little bit more nuanced. Essentially, it categorizes conflict styles into 5 different ones, according to how assertive and how cooperative you would tend to be. We're going to whiz through them all a little bit, and then we'll have a bit more time to discuss. The Climate Justice Alliance also assigns animals to each one, which you might find useful, you might not, but it's kind of adds a little bit of, maybe it makes it a little bit easier to remember. So the first one is the shark, which is kind of the competing conflict style. So this is characterized by being highly assertive and uncooperative. So this is, I would say this is probably the conflict style that we are most familiar with in our culture. Like if we're asked to think of an example of a conflict, it would often be one which involves a kind of competing conflict style. It kind of assumes that there's a winner and a loser in a conflict, that it's a competition. So in kind of politics or popular culture, I think it's probably the one that we're most familiar with. And it's characterized by kind of using overpowering and intimidating approaches to win the conflict. So it's kind of a competitive nature of conflict. I'm going to go through them quite quickly, but we can pause at the end and reflect on them a bit more. If you need a bit more time, then give me a wave. The next one is the turtle. So this is the kind of avoidant conflict style. So it's characterized by being unassertive and uncooperative. So avoidant of conflict, not liking to address it. I think this is a really common conflict style, maybe especially in the UK, if we're talking about cultural approaches to conflict. So it could take the form of postponing a conversation, withdrawing from a conflict situation, or kind of skipping over an issue because you're worried that it has the potential for conflict. Another avoidant conflict style is the teddy bear. So the teddy bear is highly cooperative, but also unassertive. So they kind of prioritize the relationship over their own goals. So it could be seen as self-sacrificing. So essentially, I think my relationship with this person is more important than my needs. So I'm going to kind of accommodate them and not try to get my point across. And then the fox, which is compromising, sits somewhere in the middle. So the fox would be halfway in both cooperation and cooperativeness, if that's a word, and assertiveness. So the priority for the fox is to find the kind of common good, to seek a compromise. I think this is also a conflict style which we see quite a lot in popular culture. Like the solution to this conflict is to find the exact middle ground and the compromise, and that's going to solve everything. I guess kind of approach. And then the owl would be collaborating. So the owl is both assertive and cooperative. The owl values both their goals and their relationships. So they would attempt to find a solution which satisfies both parties, which is different from a compromise. I think it kind of seems like they're quite similar, but a solution which satisfies both parties in a conflict isn't necessarily a compromise. It could be something entirely different. I'm struggling to think of an example right now, but hopefully that means something to you. And the owl would see conflict as a problem to be solved. So seeking to address underlying concerns and like delving into what's motivating a conflict would be characterized by that. We'll go back a little bit before we do a personal reflection, but we are going to have a few minutes to do a bit of personal reflection about our own conflict styles and how they affect the way we approach different situations. Maybe you would immediately be able to identify which conflict style feels most accurate for you, or maybe you feel like you have elements of a lot of them, or it changes a lot according to the situation. I'll give an example for myself because I think examples are useful. I think that in work or activism spaces, I'm naturally a bit unassertive in conflicts, so have elements of the turtle being avoidant and the teddy bear being accommodating. But I have been trying to work a bit more on assertiveness without being uncooperative because I've seen the harm that being unassertive can cause. I would say that that's definitely a work in progress. It's really challenging when we've kind of developed these habits in terms of conflict. And I also think that my family would probably argue that when I'm with them and when I'm comfortable, I have maybe more competing shark-like tendencies, but they only come out in certain situations. And then in terms of how that affects me in working with other people, I've definitely had experiences in the past where I haven't addressed conflict because of my lack of assertiveness and my turtleness, my avoidant nature of conflict. So it means that those conflicts are kind of simmering away under the surface and causing more harm, and I'm not listening to what they're trying to tell me about what might be wrong in a situation. I imagine that's potentially something that a lot of us have experienced, and I think it really highlights the pitfalls of conflict avoidance. Before we go into a little bit of reflection, I will just go back to the first page, or maybe, yeah, let's stick on that one. Because I did whiz through them. I think I'm gonna, Rakesh, would you mind? I don't know if you've got the notes in front of you, but could you find the link in the notes and put it in the chat so people can see the slides? And we can also keep the slides up. But just wanting to check in if that was all clear, because I did whiz through them quite a bit. Is there any questions before we go into reflection?